appreciate you staying with us here on CBS News as we continue to follow this breaking story. I'm Errol Barnett.
And I'm Lana Zak. We are following this breaking news as officials are investigating a shooting that took place at a high school in Perry, Iowa this morning.
And we should be clear, confirmed information is sparse right now. You heard there from the sheriff say there's actually very little he can confirm. What we do know is that according to police, a shooter has been identified and a number of people have been injured. It is unclear at this early hour just how many people exactly were hurt or if there have been any fatalities. Police say this shooting happened before school began at roughly 7:30 this morning. And so one highlight is that few students and faculty were actually in the building at the time. We want to bring in now Katherine Schweit. She's a lawyer and retired FBI special agent. She spent 5 years as the executive responsible for the FBI's active shooter efforts. Thanks for joining us. As we've just laid out, there's very little that's confirmed at this moment, but explain to us what's likely happening between federal, state, and local emergency officials as they piece this together and share what they know with us.
I think the sheriff's comments at the presser gave us a good indication, a little bit of what's going on. He said the officers arrived and located victims, meaning the shooter was already down, probably self-inflicted would be my guess based on my background. But of course, I don't have that information. So I think what now they're doing is collecting the evidence that they need for just to be able to identify who was injured, who wasn't, who was around, and who might be witnesses. So for police, it's a very kind of slow and methodic effort now, federal, state, local law enforcement, tribal, if they're available to help out. But I think that you can see within this, even the press conference that we heard the information that you just relayed, that law enforcement is struggling now, I think, with how to convey these emergencies in a timely manner and struggling with social media issues that come with that.
I think that's a really important point there, Katherine, because I imagine that there were many people who were wanting additional information because this was the first time that we were hearing from the authorities. It had been out on social media, but none of the details were actually confirmed in terms of how many people were injured, who was injured, what are the extent of injuries? Was it a fatality? Were multiple people killed? There's no scope, there's no scale, there's no understanding at this point about the severity of the situation. And it reminds me of the last mass shooting event that we covered, where they didn't give those numbers because they were waiting to clear the rest of the campus. But in this case, we're talking about Perry High School in Perry, Iowa. It's not that big of a building. Right. And it seems like this is more of an effort to try and keep the information contained. What would be the purpose in doing that?
So there's a couple of things, and I think that's a great thing to bring up. First of all, the law enforcement is used to managing and containing all the information at crime scenes. So they're really not in a situation where they have a competition. And right now, truthfully, the competition is going to be social media. It's a small community. Everybody knows everybody in that community who needs to know already knows who is injured, who has been killed, how many people have been injured. They have a pretty good idea of a lot of information already because the community is so small that social media passes that information very quickly in a very accurate way. The families who have somebody not at home are in the hospital right now trying to take care of them. So that's kind of a struggle that law enforcement is dealing with that I think they have to come to grips with. I've been at a lot of these scenes for the FBI, and we do try to relay as much information as you possibly can, because if somebody is deceased or injured, you don't want to release that name from a privacy concern standpoint, because then everybody shows up on their driveway. I get that. And also, we want to make sure that death notifications are properly given and sensitively given.
Yeah, Katherine, I'm sorry.
There's more that you can give out.
I guess that's what I'm asking about, because I think we all understand that nobody wants to learn that somebody that they loved has died because they're watching television. We don't want that. We don't want to be providing that just to be the first to get the information out there. But in terms of the scope and understanding the situation, the number of people injured, even a rough estimate, at least X number of people have been hurt or transferred to hospitals. But none of that information was given, and that's different from giving out people's identities.
Right. And one of the things that I think we've learned in the FBI, and sadly, we've been at many of these events. I've worked press matters for many of these events. Yeah, I mean, I think there's an appreciation that this sheriff's office has not maybe dealt with these kind of situations very often, but there are things that you can go all the way up to the line. And one of the things that we've learned about victims and survivors, and we learned this lesson from Sandy Hook, so a long time ago, is that you can say, we have these preliminary numbers. We believe preliminarily that there have been at least 2 fatalities and as many as 10 injured and I appreciate that the law enforcement doesn't want to be wrong, but they can caution, they can provide it with the caveat that helps to frame the issues for the community, including things like saying there was a shooting, it ended quickly, it was over when our officers arrived, it was contained to one room, that was before school, there were only so many people in the school. And I think that's a learning lesson that I have from the years, but it would been more helpful, I think. And I don't mean to criticize the law enforcement agency, they're doing the best they can with the knowledge that they have, but it would be helpful for the community to understand better.
And Katherine, we're watching footage of the high school come in from our affiliate there, KCCI in Iowa, as you're speaking with us. And so as we piece together what we do know, I just want to reference what our local affiliate is reporting when it comes to what witnesses at the school said took place this morning. They say a high school parent is reporting that their 15-year-old sophomore was shot at the high school, is now reportedly doing okay, but according to his father, this student was grazed by a bullet and suffered a flesh wound to his arm this morning, and that this student was in the hallway when the shooting took place, and he was able to retreat to a nearby classroom for shelter. So our Ed O'Keefe spoke with that student, and we're bringing this footage into you, and we'll bring it to our viewers as soon as we have access to it. But Katherine, what does that tell us about what took place? If there was a student shooter on campus, one student was grazed and was able to get away, how does that color the response that we're witnessing from police right now as well?
Well, one of the things that law enforcement knows, our FBI research, when I ran our program in Washington, told us is that middle school students and high school students come back to their own school to shoot. So we probably, I think knowing that there are some students who are there who ran for safety, which, run, hide, fight, that's what we want them to do. I think that there probably was a determined student to come in who had a specific target. And for whatever reason, whether it was a conflict or a frustration, real or perceived grievance, and they made this decision to come in on this first day of the new school. But I think other students were probably grazed because, shooting is not as accurate as it is on television. Right. And so it's likely that even that particular student might have just been grazed by a bullet that wasn't intended for that student.
And then so considering the FBI is assisting local officials in both investigating what happened and now communicating with the community, the families, to let them know that their students are safe, how does the fact that it may have been a student shooter affect the workflow? Do they then go to their address, we would imagine, to see what's happening at their home?
Sure. From a business process standpoint, how we investigate, no matter who the shooter is, once the shooter's identified, law enforcement's going to go to that house. But also, you can't search a house unless you have a search warrant or you have consent. If there are parents at the house, law enforcement would ask. The FBI is on scene with other agencies because all agencies respond and try to assist and provide assistance if needed. And the FBI, of course, has vast experience in evidence collection from a shooting that involves a lot of rounds released, and that's a complicated scene. I don't know how many rounds were discharged in this situation, but law enforcement would want to go to that shooter's house and either get a court order to search it or ask the people who own the house for consent to search in that house and in the student's room if it's a student. In addition to that, it's a rural community. It's possible that the student drove. They would already have identified, located where a vehicle was. If the student came in a vehicle, just from a safety standpoint, you want to know whether or not there were plans, but you also want to know if there were, other efforts, improvised explosve devices, IEDs that might have been constructed or thought about constructing. That'll tell us a bit more about whether there are potential future threats, although the sheriff made it clear there was no current threat.
Katherine, with school shootings, there very often meticulously planned, deliberate, down to as many details as the shooter has ruminated on in the case of past school shootings for months, in some cases years. There are a couple things about this that stand out to me. It's the first day back after the long holiday. It was before school actually started, so there were fewer people in the building at that time. With your experience in the FBI, does that tell you anything about the potential mindset of this shooter?
Yes, a couple of things, just jumped right out at me. The fact that it's after a holiday break, we saw from the research that I co-wrote at when I was at the FBI, that school shootings at this level often happen after a weekend or after a holiday, and it likely is because the child or the student has had time to kind of ruminate, and at some point they develop their bravery to come back to the school and do this. But you mentioned how there was some planning. First, it should be recognized that all targeted violence like this is planned. And so that means that the individuals, definitely exhibit behaviors of concern ahead of time and something to watch for. But just one other thing you mentioned about the time of day. I know I'm sorry. I just wanted to say the time of day. The fact that it was early in the morning kind of indicates to me that maybe the shooter had a target.
All right, Katherine Schweit, thank you.
We'll be back with more on this breaking story after this.